Live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to MHTV. We've got a really good title for you tonight, so let me just read it so I get it absolutely right. It is How We See Nurses Matters, it's true. Angels, Sexpots, or Professionals. And this has come out of some work that our colleague Lucy did when she was a student. So before we go any further, let's get our guests to introduce themselves, and then we can look at the social media and see how people can join in and interact with them. So, Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Lucy Judge. I'm a registered mental health nurse. I only qualified last month. So I was with UCLan for 3 years, and I did a piece in my third year, a reflection of sort of how nurses are viewed and how that differs to how the media are citing nurses. And then that, yeah, turned into a publication with Jane, and here we are.
Fantastic. Jane, you're a frequent attender.
I know.
Tell us.
So yeah, thanks for having us again. So my name's Jane Fisher. I'm a lecturer in mental health nursing at UCLan, Preston. And I'm also a mental health service user. So I've got a history of mental health challenges. So I have kind of a dual vantage point of knowing how it feels to experience mental health care and mental health treatment, but also how it feels to be a mental health professional as well. And Lucy was one of our wonderful students who has just graduated from us and just got her PIN number.
Exciting time it is. Vanessa, can you tell people how they can join in with us tonight?
I can. Hello, everyone. So you can either join in one of two ways, either on Twitter, X as it is now. Just type in the hashtag MHTV and you should see the thread there. You can join in by asking any questions, commenting on the MHTV hashtag, and we'll feed those into the conversation. So I'll have my head down looking at that throughout the episode. You can also go over to Facebook and you just need to like the Unite MHNA Facebook page. You will see the live stream there, so you can follow it and ask any comments, questions, and again, we'll feed those into the discussion.
Okay, so let's start at the start of the title. So thinking about some of the kind of maybe the problems as well as the interesting way that nurses get this kind of angel narrative around them. So surely being an angel is a good thing. Lucy, what do you say?
I'd say that maybe it wasn't meant in the way that it can be perceived. I feel that the way nurses are perceived, when they're perceived as angels, it's quite regressive. And I feel that it's quite archaic as well. I mean, it wasn't only up until about the mid-19th century that if you were a religious nurse, you were called an angel of mercy. And if you weren't religious, but still a nurse, you were called drunkards. And even now, the more socially acceptable women are called angels. And I feel like that was just sort of amplified in the time of COVID. And also seeing nurses as angels, it sort of makes them not human a little bit. So, it implies that maybe they don't need adequate pay and working conditions, that they don't have these human worries and that they should be self-sacrificing. And in attempting to, complement nurses, it is in fact quite degrading, as I say, consciously or not, as it strips responsibility from treating nurses like professionals. Angels never fail, they aren't fearful, and this minimises the professionals' skills and the boundaries as well. It suggests that nurses should really be self-sacrificing and all-knowing, and sort of, better than, I don't know, sort of better than everyone else. And in the real world, nurses and support workers and everyone in the healthcare industry, they work tremendously hard. And in the time of COVID, they were putting themselves at risk, they were putting the families at risk. And it wasn't because they were an angel, it's because they were caring, for service users and wanting to support them. So yeah, I just feel like it can be very problematic in saying that someone is sort of not human and therefore they don't need all the things that humans need, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. Yeah. Jane, did you want to add anything to that?
I think it's really interesting, kind of, in the COVID times, especially, in kind of mainstream media. The Prime Minister was clapping, at the doorstep. We were all, clapping and celebrating the NHS, and the intentions of that were good, but yet definitely this concept of nurses being compared to angels, when you kind of dig down a bit deeper into it, there's lots of kind of, there's lots of concerns about that, and lots of things that kind of make us, uncomfortable when we try and examine, that. I think the concept of angels or heroes as well, it's very one-dimensional, concept, and it kind of undermines the real, unique, and skill set that nurses and mental health nurses have. That's kind of undervalued if we're seeing nurses as as angels and as self-sacrificing, and with kind of heroic power, because we know nurses that we're just normal people, so I think some of those unrealistic expectations are really quite quite valid, to think about, really.
What do you guys think that it happens? Do you think it's on purpose? Do you think it's historical hangover? What do you think's going on with it?
I don't think by the sort of general public that it's on purpose. I feel like, they were wanting to show gratitude at that time, and possibly they may have had someone in a hospital setting, and I feel like it had good motives from the general public. However, from the media, I'm not too sure. Sometimes, I'm not too sure about sort of if they were unconsciously putting that out there, or if there was sort of another motive mixed in there, but that's just my opinion.
I mean, we'd
Very
like to
fairly
think,
put.
we'd like to think that it was well intentioned, but there's so many kind of layers of complexities to this, and I think kind of Lucy's position is is quite unique, in the sense that you came into starting your mental health nursing degree. Was it just as the pandemic had started, or was it mid-pandemic?
Just maybe like 6 months in, I started my nursing.
And I think that that particular kind of
Cohort.
potentially worldwide cohort of student nurses, I think probably were quite influenced by that kind of angel, and hero kind of kind of concept. So I don't know if, Lucy, you want to say a bit about kind of how you felt when you started your nurse training?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in mental health prior, but I hadn't really had much experience on like inpatient units. So my background was really like community. So I went on an inpatient unit, and I actually got the idea from my cousin, because he sort of said it as a bit of a joke, oh, you're an angel in blue and stuff like that, but obviously it was very serious at the time of COVID, everyone was worried. So I sort of, not took it upon myself, but I think everyone was sort of influenced by that narrative at the time, and I thought, no, I really want to do good. I want to sort all these problems, people are viewing me as like an angel, and I really want to put that out there. And it wasn't long when I was on an inpatient unit that I realized that that's not what people need or they want. You can go in and you can sort of, be acting like an angel, wanting to do everything for everyone. But when you aren't meeting someone's needs because of your maybe lack of experience, lack of, I don't know, education, something like that, they don't care like who you are. They don't care if you're an angel or not. If you aren't meeting that need at the time and you're not keeping your promises of what you should be doing, then that's the problem. And just speaking to people, obviously nurses should have these qualities of compassion and integrity, but if that's all you're going off, it's quite hard to build a therapeutic relationship off just kind words, and to help someone get better just by showing sort of empathy and stuff like that, you know. In the real world, you know, it takes a lot more than that to help someone that, you know, is struggling with their mental health.
It's interesting as well how you kind of cite it as, you know, starting in sort of like historical terms with this idea about, you know, how how nursing came out of sort of some fields of nursing came out of the kind of like army based kind of religious front to the way that nurses were seen, and women who did that kind of work were seen, because it was women pretty much then. And I think it's really interesting how that's still around with us. And when you look at how nursing always comes out as the most trusted, it's always the most trusted because we don't really say that much. I think if we expressed our opinion and our power more, I'm sure we'd fall down the scale, because
Absolutely.
it's almost not saying anything and not being anything that allows everybody to project onto you all the different thoughts and feelings. And I guess when you look at some of the images that we're talking about tonight and how they impact us as professionals, that's when you really start to see, you know, how embedded it all is in history and society and culture, and the position of women in society and all those other sorts of issues as well. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to say, Vanessa? You've been nodding. And
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, because I called my business when I worked for myself Sociable Angels. And for me, so this is a subject that I'm really interested in. And to be honest, it was just a provocation on the term angels, because for me, I'm a bit more kind of nuanced. I can kind of see both sides to the argument, because I think that, you know, as nurses, since I trained in the 1990s, I think I've seen a kind of shift away from the sort of compassion, empathy-based care to kind of, you know, wanting to professionalize, wanting to, you know, link nursing obviously to education, wanting to portray nurses differently. And I think that it became a bit too polarized in the other direction, that we kind of lost track of our kind of spiritual arts side of mental health nursing, which for me is about the therapeutic relationship. So I've always been really interested in that kind of middle ground, that, you know, we're not angels, but, you know, in some ways you could say that you're called towards mental health nursing as a career. And, you know, does it need to be polarized? I mean, I agree with you that I think the problem with the angel metaphor is it implies that, you know, nurses are passive and selfless, and that, you know, it's very much tied into the sort of feminine stereotype of nursing. But on the other hand, I think, you know, there is something for me that is about calling into nursing, and that does have a spiritual dimension. And, you know, when I worked with women in prison, you know, a few times women said to me, you know, that I was like an angel that appeared at the lowest time. And, you know, for me, I saw that as a compliment, that, you know, that was about the human connection that I had with those women. And in that kind of environment, it wasn't about doing any sort of high level scientifically based interventions. It was about the relationship skills that I developed, you know, and that kind of trust and empathy with, you know, women who were very traumatized. So yeah, so I'm really interested. I mean, the sociable aspect of it for me was about social media, because it was during an era where I did feel that social media democratized the conversation, and that there was something around leadership that was about being more sociable, more accessible and open, that kind of, you know, removed that them and us kind of scenario. So yeah, so I was quite intrigued that we were discussing this tonight, because it's something that, you know, that is that I've thought about a lot over the last few years. Yeah.
again, it's that like, it's with metaphors, they mean different things to different people and at different times as well. So it's a
Yeah.
good point with that.
Yeah, you
And I
know, you're
guess-
saying about history, Nicky, as well. I was thinking about that, because I was thinking like the history of mental health nursing is very different, isn't it? Because the history of mental health nursing is caught up with custodial practice, and it's, you know, was men really that were engaged in mental health nursing rather than women. Whereas I've always thought of the angel metaphor really as applying to adult nurses, you know, in white dresses and white gowns. So I think mental health nurses have been positioned differently over history in that argument. And also something very kind of Eurocentric, isn't there, about referring to nurses as angels as well, I think. And you kind of have that media image that it's somebody who's blonde, blue-eyed, you know, innocent looking and white generally, and young. So I think it just plays into that stereotype as well.
I think
it's interesting. Go on,
I was just going to say, I think what was particularly interesting about the about the angel and hero narrative that came out of the COVID pandemic was that it did inspire a lot of people to want to become nurses and want to become student nurses. So Lucy was inspired by that. And after 3 years, she is a wonderful nurse. So there is something something positive come out of that. I think that the key is with kind of the paper, and Lucy's initial kind of initial assignment for a third year reflection is kind of it's the evolution of that journey of okay, so we've got student nurses that are motivated to want to be nurses, mental health nurses, by COVID, by this angel and hero narrative, and that's absolutely great. But we need that their kind of identity, and their journey, needs to kind of be a kind of a deep, reflexive journey over those 3 years. And I think what Lucy kind of perfectly summed up in her third year assignment was how that concept had evolved over the 3 years. She was motivated to become a mental health nurse by the COVID pandemic, but by the end of the 3 years, she'd also come to realise that qualities, such as being able to practice in terms of evidence-based practice, and being an accountable professional, and that knowledge and those skills had evolved over the 3 years, and I marked Lucy's work when it was submitted, and I think one of the biggest things that stood out to me and some of the other lecturers was that there was kind of an overriding theme of compassion throughout it all. Lucy was motivated by compassion. Her concept of compassion had changed and evolved over the 3 years, but was still very much rooted in kind of deep compassion and wanting to be the best possible educated nurse that she could be for those service users. So in a long-winded way, I think there's a real message for educational providers to have these kind of reflective conversations with student nurses about what their motivation was, and and how that evolves over the 3 years.
It's interesting that so much of this is based on kind of a respect or a liking for nurses as well. And I think with the public, that's where it sits. When people talk about, oh, you're an angel, it's a shorthand way of saying thank you, isn't it? Or saying you're something that's lovely. And that's great, isn't it? But it's really interesting that when we want to show respect to doctors, we pay them and we give them power. And when we want to respect nurses, like, you little angel. And it feels quite different in the way that people are being rewarded, seen as valuable, absolutely, and then rewarded. And I think sometimes that kind of angel narrative just hedges people around a little bit, maybe, from my perspective. And I think something as well about, like, it's really hard to be a nurse sometimes, Don't worry, I'm not in the middle of a breakdown. It's okay. I'm not about to start going. But it's like, it is, isn't it? Because sometimes when you don't feel like being nice, that it's very important that you hear what someone has to say, even when it's difficult or it's hard or it's upsetting, or you feel really sad, because it's not about you. You use yourself as a tool to support other people. Whereas an angel is something that just is. An angel doesn't have to try. An angel doesn't have to make an effort or learn stuff that's hard, and then work a second job and then come back and do this stuff. And I think sometimes this idea that it's an inherent quality of goodness that just floats around on some people. I'm sure that's true, and that's fantastic. But actually, the work of being a nurse is properly work, I think, and it doesn't always get recognised as that. And to suggest that it's kind of like an inherent quality, which it is for some people, but I think it kind of undermines everyone who's out there, wiping vomit off themselves and going back out there with a smile. It's not that easy.
No, I agree with you. There's a passive nature to it as well, isn't there? Whereas mental health nursing isn't passive, in terms of our advocacy skills, kind of with a wider multidisciplinary team and, beyond really. And and with people who are unwell and can't make decisions for themselves, you know, and kind of needing to tread that path of being compassionate and empathic, but kind of still having to act in somebody's best interest. I don't feel like that fits with, you know, the metaphor of an angel, really. So
no, not at all. And, you know, mental health nurses on the front line, you know, like Lucy and many, many others, are navigating those ethical and moral dilemmas daily. You know, they're balancing, you know, restrictions and coercive practices, whilst also claiming to be, you know, providing, you know, kind, compassionate nursing care. That is not easy. That is, you know, that is not easy at all, and that requires, you know, real advanced interpersonal communication skills, you know, to navigate that. You know, so for, you know, for me, it kind of does a disservice to, you know, to mental health nurses, and kind of undermines, you know, some of that professionalism, you know, and the fact that, you know, nurses work hard to get that PIN number. You know, we have degree educated professionals, you know, as mental health nurses.
Do you think the reason it's pervasive as an image is that actually people aren't 100% sure what nurses do anymore? Because I mean, I think everybody.
I think there is that. You know, my daughter's 14 and she's really into Grey's Anatomy at the moment. And she said to me the other day, Mum, why did you go into nursing? Why didn't you become a doctor? You know, nursing seems like the lowest kind of in the team. And I'm like, right, where do we start with this one?
Wow, trigger warning, everybody.
Yeah. At the same time, you know, like describing mental health nursing to a 14-year-old is really, really difficult, because obviously Grey's Anatomy, it's surgery, it's kind of like really obvious sort of skills-based work. And, you know, some of our work's kind of a little bit hidden, isn't it? And, you know, for a young person, they're not necessarily exposed to the mental health world in the same way. And we don't have dramas on TV, do we, about mental health nurses, but we have lots of medical dramas. But I just thought it was really interesting. And when we're thinking about the work that we're doing with schools, you know, like across the country really, and trying to attract young people into nursing, it's just really interesting that kind of media portrayal that's really influential to young people is that, you know, nurses are not kind of seen as having much status, and that, you know, the work of mental health nurses in particular is pretty invisible. However, I was at the cinema the other day, and there's an NHS campaign, I don't know if people have seen that, and it actually portrays a mental health nurse. So I was absolutely delighted, you know, talking to a young person. I think it's to support it's for a charity, isn't it, that's supporting nurses working on the front line, I think, who were struggling with their own mental health. But it was really nice to see, you know, within the images of nurses, that there was a mental health nurse there.
Brilliant. Is there anything we haven't said about nursing and angel narratives before we kind of broaden it out? Lucy, you're going to say something.
I was just going to say, yeah, because being a mental health nurse, it is so multi-layered, and, you know, some days you don't feel like an angel. You know, when someone, say, is detained under the Mental Health Act, you know, they're getting a lot of rights taken off them, and to do that, I mean, you know, no one enjoys doing that. Well, no good nurse would enjoy doing that. And, you know, on days like that, when you see people upset, or, you know, people are getting detained, you don't feel like an angel at all. But that's not why you do it. You're doing it because, you know, you want people to get better, and you want people to be safe and live. But yeah, I was just going to add that as well, on the topic of mental health nurses, rather than, like general nurses. It can be quite upsetting, obviously.
And you know, that those reflections and that journey, that reflective journey that Lucy's been on over the last 3 years, you know, that is what we want for student nurses. You know, and from a, you know, a mental health service user, you know, perspective, you know, I can only speak for myself, but I want nurses like Lucy, you know, who are driven by compassion, but also understand the, you know, the nuanced role of a mental health nurse. You know, that sometimes is, you know, it's not easy. It's really, you know, it's really difficult. You know, and I think that's, you know, that's important to, you know, to recognize as well.
And sort of broaden this sort of like discussion out a little bit then. So thinking about some of the ways that nurses are presented, we were saying just before we came on air, anyone who's made the mistake of Googling nurse uniforms, hoping to get like a new uniform top or something, soon realizes that the internet in particular does not always see nurses professionally. So we've got nurse imagery around like the sex pot, the battle axe, that these sort of images, they're not created by nurses about themselves, they're created by society about nurses. I wondered if you guys had any thoughts about the way that we portrayed sometimes.
I think it definitely relates to, I mean, throughout history, women were sort of seen as like, they always fit into categories, don't they? Like harlots, spinsters. And as I was saying, only a couple of 100 years ago, you know, nurses were either drunks or they were angels. So I feel, yeah, people maybe try and put people in boxes a little bit. And I feel like they have done for a long time. So yeah, I can see why that's sort of still happening and can be sexualized, because that's one of the categories that you know, sometimes people are put into, unfortunately.
There is a rule, and I cannot remember the name of it, so and please don't Google it. But that anything you can imagine, someone has created a fantasy about. Like it's a bleak thought,
Yeah.
so don't dwell too long on it. But I think there's something to do with the way that if you're giving intimate care, so anything from like even like housemaids cleaning to nurses caring for people, all those things are fetishized because they have that element of intimacy, and intimacy is dangerous sometimes. So I think that there's always that kind of link that goes back and forth that stays present in people's minds. And everybody, you know, God love them, at Halloween loves a good uniform and cuts the bottom off it if it's for women.
Yeah.
So it's always a bit of a challenge with things like that. I wonder what you think, Jane.
I mean, I was going to say, you could say the same about the images of mental health patients, you know, which are incredibly, you know, derogatory.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen Halloween costumes, you know, that are, that are called, you know, mental health patient in a straitjacket. You know, so these images, you know, and these, you know, portrayals, you know, they're incredibly damaging, you know, and incredibly offensive to you know, to a lot of people. I think for me, what's important is about, you know, nurses, mental health nurses, and you know all nurses kind of uniting together and actually saying, you know, actually, we are educated professionals. You know, we do incredibly, you know, difficult, complex, tasks and jobs, you know, day in, day out. And that is far more complex and unique than can be summed up, you know, in any kind of, you know, simplistic idea of, you know, an angel or a hero. You know, because as mental health nurses, you know, and adult nurses, children's nurses, we're so much more than that. You know, so for me, it's about kind of reclaiming, you know, that true and rightful identity as educated professionals.
Do you think that sometimes people struggle with women in power or situations of power, you know, where you get the battle axe and things like that? That's almost like funny that you've got a ward manager or a matron in charge.
I think another interesting, you know, aspect to this is, you know, is male nurses, you know, and how they're portrayed, you know, and their identity as well, you know, which I wouldn't want to, you know, speak on behalf of male nurses, but you know, the same could be said for, you know, for that as well.
It runs alongside what people expect from a gender without updating it from 1800. So it's an interesting thing. So where does that leave us in terms of, like, we've got these clear ideas about what societal things bubbling around about what a nurse is, what a nurse should be. What do you think the way sort of like forward with it all is?
For me, I think from a mental health service user perspective, is that I want nurses that are kind, that are compassionate, and that are able to advocate on my behalf, that are able to do what they say that they're going to do. You know, and for me, that is not an angel. or that is not a hero. That's somebody that's willing to actually connect to me on a human to human level, and to be with me in my distress, or what could potentially be the worst day of my life. The ability to connect to someone in distress, you know, that's not an angel or a hero. You know, that's a well-educated professional with highly advanced interpersonal skills.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jane. You know, going forward, definitely. I mean, nursing is already so full of it, you know, of educated professionals who are experienced but do have the qualities of an angel, like compassion, integrity, and not only nurses as well, you know, support workers, OTs, you know, everyone in the staffing, but in healthcare. But yeah, I think going forward, I don't know, as I've said, I think the angel narrative can be a little bit dangerous, and I think it's problematic for service users as well. You know, service users, like Jane said, they deserve, you know, a human who is willing to work hard to support them, but also be empathetic and compassionate. You know, they shouldn't get someone who's sort of believing that they're a higher being and they can sort everything for a service user, because I mean, we all know it's about supporting service users, not solving everything for them, because you've got to do it together. And that's why, yeah, I think it's important to base what nurses need on human qualities and what humans can do and what we as people can do, rather than sort of putting them on a pedestal and thinking, oh, they can sort everything. I think it's about being real about what mental health nursing is like, and creating a narrative that reflects that well for service users and staff as well.
Definitely, couldn't agree more, Lucy. Well said.
Thank you.
I've got a question come through, and I can see, I think that there's one for Vanessa as well. Well, a couple coming through. The one I've got is asking about how you got published as a student. So can we take a little sidebar on that one for a second?
Yeah, no problem. So I actually I just put it through as one of my sort of works. So we got in third year, I got I can't even think about what the word is, to write an essay about a reflection. So we had to do reflections every year to reflect on what we've learned and how we've grown. So in my third year, I decided to do a presentation instead of an essay. Just found it a lot easier, and I knew that not many people were doing that. And then instead of sort of sticking to the grain, it was a bit of a risk, because in my first and second year, I'd be, for example, I did this a few months ago and this is what I did this now, this is how it's changed and why have I done that. But I sort of reflected on my whole journey and how it had changed for me and how I'd changed in the 3 years. So yeah, I submitted it as a PowerPoint. I was a bit wondering, oh gosh, you know, is this a bit too out there? But no, I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I did the risk, because Jane marked it. And then we worked on it together and we got it published in British Journal of Mental Health Nursing. So yeah, if you want to take the risk, because I'm so glad I did.
And I think what stood out for, you know, us as markers as well, that it was such a it was full of authenticity, you know, and who Lucy is as a person. And it was such a deep kind of, you know, reflective kind of account of her, you know, journey over the 3 years. You know, and it was an amazing piece of work. I marked it, and then I was late to pick my kids up from school because I couldn't like put my computer down. I needed to get to the end. I had goosebumps when I was listening to the PowerPoint, you know, both from a mental health service user and a lecturer as well. And then I was counting down the days until the results were released. And then once the results were released, I was like, Lucy, let's publish this. And kind of that's, you know, where we got the publication from. You know, there's no rule book to say that student nurses can't publish their work. can't write for publication. You don't need to wait until you're a lecturer or an academic, or until you've got a PhD or a master's or whatever. If you've got something valid and important to say that you're passionate about, so to student nurses, approach your lecturing staff, approach the lecturers, because they'd be more than happy to work with students. And it's and from the paper that myself and Lucy published, we've had lots and lots of conversations in the classroom subsequently with other cohorts, about the very issues that that Lucy brought. So yeah, student nurses can absolutely, don't be afraid of publishing.
That's absolutely brilliant to hear. Absolutely right as well. Because I think you can always get a bit of imposter syndrome when I'll do it when I've done this. It'll be okay for me to say what I think when this has happened. And like, no, if you're having a good thought, share it with the family of nurses now.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And everyone's voice matters, and sometimes you do get imposter syndrome and you think, well, I'll just write what I always write. But if you've got something to say, say it. Because the majority of the time a lot of other people are feeling the exact same way, or they might not have found a way to say it just yet. So yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, everyone's richer for it. Vanessa, do you have some questions coming through there on WhatsApp? Oh, you're on mute. I haven't had a chance to say that for ages. It's like COVID again.
I had to turn myself on mute because my dog joined the discussion for 5 minutes. So right then, just going back into it. So yeah, Annie Coxey, I think it's from when we were talking about the angel metaphor. She's put seen as something we are rather than the profession we do, undermining the expertise and evidence-based practice we are skilled in using, which that was an interesting.
Absolutely.
And then the other one is she's written, ICN has published a helpful definition of mental health nursing. We need to move away from not being able to articulate what we do. It's not helpful. We are experts in holistic mental health care assessment and intervention. By not regularly articulating this, it exacerbates the challenges around defining mental health nursing, subject to much interpretation. So I think that really reflects a lot of what we've been talking about.
And I think that is kind of a wider problem as well, that as mental health nurses, it can be more challenging than with adult nurses to actually quantify what we do and actually, make a list of the things that we do or the skills that we have. So historically, it has been difficult to actually, for us as mental health nurses, to actually, define what it is that we do and what it is that makes us unique, and our, unique skill set. So I think this definitely kind of feeds into that, more kind of broader narrative, about valuing mental health nurses and being able to, to articulate, what it is that we do, and the, the unique skills that we bring to mental health services.
Definitely.
Dave is frantically contacting us via WhatsApp saying, mention our student page. So there is a student page. It will get retweeted by the fabulous Dave. And we absolutely publish students in the journal as well. So just exactly as Lucy and Jane have said, if you've got something to say, come and say it. We'll help you say it. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I've been on here with a few students now as well. And it's really, the students and, the newly qualified nurses like Lucy, who's working on the front line. These are exactly, the people that we need to be listening to and we need to be learning from.
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Time is marching on, so we're going to come round everybody and see if there's any last things that people want to say. Who would like to go first? Lucy, it's your show.
I knew it was going to be me.
I felt it. I felt I could see who's not looking at me. No, if you
no,
you want to finish?
I haven't really got much else to say. I think I've said pretty much everything. I definitely agree with a couple of the comments that were sent in, that it is so multi-layered, mental health nursing, and it is hard to say what we do on a day-to-day basis, because you can do so much and you can feel like you haven't really done anything. But yeah, even these little things of just trying your best for each patient, you know, and doing what you say you will do, I think that is the most important thing. You know, just treating everyone as individuals, remembering that you're human as well. You know, you can't solve everything. That is not your job. You're there to support people in their recovery. But yeah, I would 100% recommend mental health nursing. And you know, I do thank people that have called me angels. I know that it wasn't meant in a derogatory way, but I think, yeah, as a wider image, it has got its flaws. But thank you very much for having me. I've absolutely loved it. So thank you.
Good. Jane, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I just probably just add to that kind of, you know, as mental health nurses as a whole, we need to kind of, you know, reclaim our identity, our unique skill set, you know, and articulate what it is that we do, and what makes us really unique. Because, you know, as Lucy said, it's, you know, that's far more, you know, complex and unique than kind of simplistic and, you know, one-dimensional ideas around being an angel or a hero. You know, and mental health service users, you know, they need a lot more than that.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I think I still have the same position, really, that there's aspects of the angelic kind of metaphor that are useful in terms of thinking about compassion and empathy, but of course aspects of it that are really unhelpful in terms of it not defining kind of the professionalism of the work that we do. But also thinking about Lucy's comment about, you know, when we have to do things like detain people under the Mental Health Act, you know, we can still do that with empathy and compassion and still find ways of making people feel in control, and, you know, making sure people know the rights and doing that in the least restrictive way.
Definitely.
I think sometimes nursing kind of gets a bit polarized, one or the other, that people go down the road of becoming, you know, too process orientated in nursing and too focused on the sort of, you know, really definable skills. And actually, I think what's really skilled is when a mental health nurse is able to combine the two, because I think that is where, you know, the real skill of what our work is, really. So yeah, I'll end on that. But it's been great having you both on here. I think it's always good to have like a more provocative discussion, isn't it, that gets people thinking about nursing. So it's been really welcomed tonight. Thank you.
I just want to add as well, when I spoke about, yeah, people being detained, I know, you know, it's sort of not polarized, but yeah, it's just, it's not nice for, you know, anyone, is it? And it's hard to see that for service users. But I agree, you need to use sort of empathy, communication, definitely read someone's rights. But yeah, it's just, yeah, hard decisions sometimes, but I understand that's best for the service user.
Of course, yeah.
Interesting, isn't it? So, because it takes you back to kind of art and science of nursing, the old Norman Ryrie book from back in the day.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess what I'm thinking as well is this idea that metaphors are like a shorthand for understanding something, we're explaining something, aren't they? So maybe we just need to own our own a bit more, own our story a bit more, and actually tell a better story than, you know, people bending over with short skirts or angels flying around on half pay and not having been to the loo for a whole shift. So maybe that's the next step to go to. Next week, obviously it's been fantastic having Lucy just at this turning point of her career moving into practice. We've got a colleague, Tegan Blackhurst, who's a lecturer who's just moving from practice into academia and having what I think is a shell shock experience from having that strange move, having like foot in practice and a foot in kind of higher ed as well. So talking about her journey, and also she's done lots of work on kind of trauma-informed care. So I hope you'll join us for next week and we'll find that interesting and useful. So thank you very much, everybody, and special big thanks to our guests. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.